Welcome back to Things You Don't Know. This is a topic that we're covering today that is near and dear to my heart. When people hear the phrase Native American storytelling, they may picture one shared collection of legends. That is the first misunderstanding we need to correct. There are hundreds of Native nations, each with its own history, language, homeland, ceremonies, and rules about when and how stories should be told.
And this episode is not an attempt to compress all indigenous traditions into one system. We will use several publicly shared examples, but how Haudenosaunee creation account is not interchangeable with the Lakota emergence account, and the Tlingit Raven story does not belong to every native community.
And we should also say that some stories are sacred, seasonal, restricted, or intended only for particular people. We're not going to retell private ceremonial knowledge. We're just discussing traditions that are native nations, cultural institutions, and native storytellers have chosen to share publicly. In many native communities, a story can entertain, but entertainment is only just one purpose. Stories can teach children how to behave, explain relationships among people, animals, and the land, reserve family and national history, and carry meanings built into a language.
Yes, the preservation for family and national history is very important. That changes how we should listen. A story about an animal may also be teaching patience, humility, courage, or the consequences of selfishness. A creation story may explain not only how the world began, but what human beings owe to that world.
A historical narrative may identify places, migrations, agreements, conflicts, and responsibilities. Oral tradition can encompass philosophy, education, law, history, environmental knowledge, and community identity simultaneously.
And that is very different than treating a story as an old fashioned tale that survived only because nobody had written it down yet. Oral tradition is not an incomplete stage on the way to writing. It is a developed method of preserving and transmitting knowledge.
Creation stories are among the most important examples, but they differ greatly from nation to nation. In the Oneida and wider Haudenosaunee tradition, a publicly shared account tells of Sky Woman coming from the sky world. Animals help her. Muskrat brings earth from beneath the water, and the land grows on Turtle's back.
The meaning is not limited to the question, how did land physically appear? The account places cooperation at the beginning of the human world. Animals are participants, they are not scenery. Even a small animal whose effort may be underestimated can become essential.
And it also explains why Turtle Island is more than the modern nickname. It connects land, identity, memory, and responsibility. Symbols from the creation account continued in art, community life, and cultural expression.
A different example comes from the Lakota emergence tradition connected with Wind Cave in what is now South Dakota. In the publicly presented version, people once lived below the earth while the world above was being prepared. Their emergence is tied to the coming of the buffalo and to a particular homeland.
That kind of account is not merely a general statement that people came from somewhere. It connects a nation to a place. The geography itself carries meaning. The story tells listeners where they belong and how their relationship with the land began.
This is why it is misleading to place every native creation story into a single category. called folklore and then compare it only with modern scientific explanation. These stories are also about belonging, ethics, kinship, and the proper relationship between human beings and the rest of creation.
Yeah, let's turn to another topic, trickster figures. One of the best known parts of native storytelling is the trickster figure. But even here, there is no single universal native trickster. Different nations tell different stories, and the same figure may have different qualities in different communities.
Raven is prominent in Tlingit, Haida, and Simpian traditions. Raven may be a trickster, a transformer, or a cultural hero. In some publicly shared stories, Raven's appetite, pride, or schemes cause trouble. In others, Raven's actions bring something important into the world.
Among Lakota storytellers, Iktomi is often represented as a spider like trickster. He may be clever, powerful, foolish, selfish, or all of those within the same story. His failures allow listeners to see the results of bad judgment without turning the lesson into a lecture.
Yeah, Coyote appears in the traditions of many Western nations, including Dineen winter storytelling. But Coyote should not be treated as one character with one official biography. Each community has its own stories, meanings, and storytelling rules.
Yes, and that is what makes trickster stories useful. Tricksters cross boundaries. They exaggerate ordinary human weaknesses, greed, impatience, vanity, dishonesty, or the belief that cleverness excuses this bad behavior.
They often teach through consequences rather than commandments. The storyteller does not always announce, "Here is the moral." The audience watches the trickster create a problem, escape one problem, or fail to escape another. Children and adults alike are expected to think about what happened.
Wolves also appear in the histories and teachings of several native nations, but they do not carry one universal meaning. Their role must be understood within the tradition of the particular community telling the story.
In Anishinaabe teachings, the wolf, Ma'ingan, is described as a relative, teacher, and companion whose path is closely connected with that of the Anishinaabe people. Stories about Ma'ingan can teach cooperation, careful hunting, family responsibility, and the importance of protecting language and traditional ways of life.
Among the Oneida, the Wolf Clan is associated with pathfinding and guidance. These examples show that the wolf is not simply just a symbol of fierceness. Depending on the nation and the story, wolves may represent responsibility, knowledge, kinship, or the duty to help others find the proper path. Now, stories for children are not necessarily simple stories. They can build memory, attention, language, and social understanding. A child learns when to speak, when to listen, how to recognize danger, and how individual actions affect the whole group.
A widely shared Cherokee example is the story of the first fire. In public versions, powerful or fast animals try and fail to bring fire from an island. Water Spider succeeds by using skill, preparation, and a container she makes herself.
For a child, the story is memorable because the characters are animals and the problem is clear, but the teaching is substantial. Size and status do not always determine usefulness. Careful thinking can matter more than force. A community benefits when it listens to someone others may underestimate.
That's right, Dr. Weaver. And it's also a story about technology. Water Spider does not simply seize the fire, She works out how to carry it safely. The lesson joins courage with planning.
Children's storytelling can also include humor, repetition, audience participation, and familiar characters. Those features are not signs that a story is intellectually shallow. Repetition helps children remember language, sequence, and consequences.
The child is not always handed a final explanation. An adult may ask, why did the character fail? Or what should have happened? That makes storytelling an active form of education rather than a one way performance.
Teaching stories often work indirectly. Instead of listing rules, they place a listener inside a situation. Someone ignores advice, breaks the responsibility, behaves arrogantly, or refuses to share. The results reveal the lesson.
Just a quick note here on the side, we are going to soon be publishing a whole series of stories. And I would encourage you to check that out because we've followed some of these kind of principles. Right, Dr. Dineen?
Absolutely, I can't wait.
I can't wait for them to see what we got coming, Dr. Weaver. I think we have some pretty good principles and we tell some really good stories with those.
And they're not just meant for the children either, are they?
No, they're not. I think they're meant for the children and the parents to learn lessons from.
Teaching stories often work indirectly. Instead of listing rules, they place a listener inside a situation. Someone ignores advice, breaks a responsibility, behaves arrogantly, or refuses to share. The results reveal the lesson.
Psychologically, that method can be powerful. People often resist direct correction, especially when they feel accused. A story creates enough distance for listeners to recognize a behavior without feeling they need to defend themselves.
That's right. And it also allows the same story to grow with the listener. A child may hear a lesson about obedience or sharing. An adult may hear a lesson about leadership, family obligations, or the misuse of power.
The meaning can also depend on the storyteller, the audience, the season, and the immediate needs of the community. That does not mean the story has no stable meaning. It means the telling is responsive.
Yes, a written rule usually tries to remove a variation. A teaching story can preserve a recognizable structure while allowing the storyteller to emphasize what the present audience needs to understand.
That flexibility is sometimes mistaken for inaccuracy, but teaching is not the same thing as reciting a transcript at all. A story can preserve its central relationships, events, and lessons while its wording changes.
Yeah. Now we reach the claim that oral history must be unreliable because it depends on memory. That claim assumes that oral tradition is casual conversation repeated randomly from one person to another.
As a historian, Dr. Weaver, let me say that's not true at all. In reality, many communities develop roles, objects, ceremonies, and public methods that supported memory. On the Northern Plains, for example, winter counts use pictographs to mark an important event associated with each year. A designated keeper preserved the count and explained the images.
The picture was not expected to contain every detail by itself. It worked as a memory key connected to an organized oral account. The visual record and the spoken record supported one another.
Haudenosaunee wampum belts could also commemorate agreements, events, and relationships. Certain people were responsible for remembering what the designs represented and reading that meaning back to the larger community.
Right. That system includes accountability. A person is not simply improvising a private memory. The account belongs to a community whose members may know the story and recognize major errors or omissions.
Oral knowledge can also be connected to landmarks, songs, names, ceremonies, family lines, and repeated gatherings. Each one provides another structure for memory. Written records are extremely valuable, but writing does not guarantee truth. A document can be biased, mistaken, incomplete, mistranslated, or written to justify the interest of government, missionary, military officer, company, or individual.
Many written descriptions of native people were produced by outsiders who did not understand the language or the culture they were describing. Some writers never witnessed the events themselves. Others had political reasons to portray native nations as primitive, dangerous, vanishing, or incapable of governing themselves.
Once an error is printed, later writers may copy it. The fact that several books repeat the same claim does not necessarily mean that several independent witnesses confirmed it. They may all be repeating one flawed source.
Oral tradition has vulnerabilities too. Memory can change. Storytellers can disagree. Details can be lost. But historians also question written sources. The fair approach is not to trust every oral account or every document automatically. It is to examine who preserved it, why it was preserved, how it was transmitted, and what other evidence supports it. It's a kind of a thing I like to say maybe consider the source.
Absolutely, Chandler. Archaeology, geography, written documents, linguistic evidence, material objects, and oral histories can be considered together. Sometimes oral tradition supplies information that the written record ignored. Sometimes it identifies the meaning of a place or object that outsiders recorded without understanding.
The responsible statement is not oral tradition is always perfectly accurate. No source deserves that claim. The responsible statement is oral tradition is evidence, and it must be evaluated with the same seriousness and care given to other forms of evidence.
Modern readers often judge accuracy by exact wording. For example, we expect a quotation to remain identical. But many oral traditions preserve a story through structure, sequence, relationships, names, and meaning, rather than through a word for word script.
A storyteller may adjust the length for children, expand an explanation for adults, or use a local expression. And that variation does not automatically change the sensual account.
Think about the difference between a musical score and a performance. Now, two performances can differ in pacing or emphasis while remaining recognizably the same composition. In oral tradition, responsible variation can be part of the form.
At the same time, communities often have boundaries. A storyteller may be expected to know the correct sequence, avoid changing important relationships, acknowledge where the story came from, or tell it only during the proper season.
And that combination, variation within responsibility, is more discipline than outsiders sometimes assume it is.
Yes, the survival of these traditions is especially significant because federal and church run assimilation systems tried to separate native children from their languages and cultures. When a language is suppressed, stories lose sounds, humor, wordplay, and concepts that may not transfer fully into English.
That is why language revitalization and storytelling are often connected. Restoring a language is not merely replacing English words with native words, It can restore ways of organizing knowledge and relationships.
Absolutely, Dr. Dineen. Well put.
Today, native storytellers use live performance, books, recordings, animation, classrooms, museums, language programs, podcasts, and film. That does not mean that oral tradition has ended. It just means that living traditions are using additional tools.
Yes, it's a progression. It is progressive. It is alive. It is moving today. A recording can preserve a voice, but it does not replace the human relationship between storyteller and listener. A book can introduce a story, but the community still determines what the story means and how it should be used.
It's important to remember, ladies and gentlemen, that Native people are also not required to share every story for outsiders' education and edification. Cultural preservation includes the right to protect knowledge as well as the right to share and publish it.
Now let's turn our attention now to how outsiders should handle these stories. Now the first rule here is specificity. Specificity. Ask which nation a story comes from. Avoid introducing something as an Indian legend with no community, storyteller, or source identified. You want to pin down the source if you can.
Second, learn whether the story was shared for public use. A story found online is not automatically free of cultural restrictions. Some accounts are appropriate only during certain seasons or in particular settings.
Third, prefer native storytellers, tribal cultural departments, and tribally guided educational sources. Older collections may be useful, but they may contain certain mistranslation, missing context, outdated language, or material recorded without proper permission.
And fourth, do not treat the story as some fossil from a distant past. Native nations, they're living political and cultural communities. Their storytelling traditions continue to develop as time goes on.
Finally, listen for more than a simple moral. Ask what the story says about land, family, authority, reciprocity, community memory, and the responsibilities of the listener.
It's important to remember Native American storytelling traditions are diverse, but several broad principles appear repeatedly. Knowledge is carried through relationships, stories are connected to particular peoples and places, and remembering can be a community responsibility.
And creation stories explain belonging. Trickster stories expose human weaknesses. Children's stories train attention and judgment. Teaching stories allow listeners to reach conclusions rather than simply just obey instructions.
That's right. Oral tradition should not be dismissed as less reliable merely because it is spoken. Writing is a technology for preserving information and an important one. Oral tradition is also a technology, one built from trained memory, repetition, performance, community correction, visual reminders, place, language, and responsibility.
The right question is not simply, was it written down? The better questions are, who carried it? How was it preserved? What purpose did it serve? And what does the community that owns such tradition say it means?
And when we begin with those questions, we stop treating native stories as anonymous folklore and start recognizing them as living bodies of knowledge.
And that is the part many people still do not know. Listen, I want to thank you for listening to this. And I hope that you will look forward to our children's stories. They're not really children's stories or children and families. But thanks for listening. Give us your likes, your comments, and subscribe.
Yes, and stay tuned for our children's stories. And we hope that this has given you a new appreciation for storytelling. Be sure to leave a like, come back, subscribe, and comment. Bye for now.
Bye bye.